Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Insider's Guide to Project Cars 2, where today we'll be taking a look at advanced overtaking techniques and maneuvers. Now, we covered the basics of overtaking previously in the Insider's Guide series, and in that episode we basically just took a look at the simple overtaking down the inside, a relatively simple overtake around the outside, but more focusing on car positioning, when is the best time to overtake, how far back from your opponent you should be, and what kind of positioning you need to be taking up when trying to overtake your opponent in order to gain basically the best chance of successfully making that overtake. In this episode, however, we'll be going through some of the more advanced maneuvers and techniques that you can do in order to gain your position from your opponent. So in this example here, we're coming out the exit of the final turn at Hockenheim, and right behind this yellow BMW M6 just in front of us. And you can see he's got quite a bit of a tank slapper there coming out the exit of the final turn, which is giving me a very good run and a very good opportunity as we approach the first turn. Now, the first turn here at Hockenheim isn't typically an overtaking place. It's very difficult to do so. It's a very short braking zone. There's only really one line through the corner, such as the corner's radius and the kind of the way the corner is actually shaped, and the curbs are really awkward. It's such high speed as well that it's almost impossible to go 2x2 through that first turn without either car making massive sacrifices in speed or potentially it resulting in disaster. But what I'm actually planning on doing instead is faking a move on our opponent here. So this is the first example of an overtaking technique and maneuver that we'll be taking a look at. So on the run down here towards turn 1, what I've done is move to the inside and basically occupying his mirrors. I'm basically essentially just trying to divert my opponent's eyes away from the braking point, the apex and the corner up ahead of them and their general reference points that they're going to be keeping an eye on, and instead I want them to be looking at their mirrors, looking around, trying to spot and pick out where I am positioned, and essentially just trying to distract them as best as I can. Now, as we actually come up to the braking zone here, what I'm actually doing is now darting back over to the racing line in order to give myself the best chance in order to actually make the corner. And as you can see, we're actually very close to our opponent here. Now, because I'm so close, I've had to brake slightly earlier than our opponent, and the braking point is right around here, around the 100 brake marker board and in and around the curb. So we've both braked at exactly the right point, but as you can see, my opponent has gone for a much more direct line in towards the apex of the corner. As you can see, he's actually carrying a little bit more speed as well. He's not quite bleeding off the speed as quickly as I have been able to. And we both do actually manage to make the apex perfectly fine, but you can see that our opponent has carried too much speed coming into the corner now because he was looking to see where I was, and I've managed to successfully distract him. He's therefore gone and messed up the corner. As you can see, he's run a little bit deep over the exit curb there. But what his second and major mistake that he made here was actually trying to come back across the curbs on the exit of turn 1. Now, these curbs are very heavily serrated, they're quite large, and it's very easy for them to unsettle the car. What he should have done is actually stayed to the left of those curbs and waited to rejoin the track after the curbs end on the painted green tarmac at the end of that curbing there. But because I am kind of moving over to the right hand side and he's recognized that I may have a slight potential run, he's kind of panicked and tried to come back onto the circuit in order to essentially cover me off and defend. But as you can see there, he's just gone and caught the end of that curb quite dramatically, and that's going to cost him an awful lot of speed and momentum. If we actually jump over to our opponent now, you can see here that as he comes across the curbs, gets a slight wiggle. The curb kind of kicks him a little bit. That costs him the run down towards this corner, which is giving me the inside line. And as we continue to play it out, as you can see, both of us nailing the braking point. He's tried to outbrake me a little bit around the outside, but because I'm there on the inside and I've nailed my braking point, I managed to consolidate the position and take it away from him. So that is a good example of distracting your opponent and trying to force them to make an error without any contact in order to gain a position. Now, in this example, we're going to be taking a look at taking the corner away from your opponent and effectively forcing them to give up the corner. We're at the Red Bull Ring. As you can see, we've just come out of turn 2 and we're right behind our opponent here in the BMW M6. And we're picking up the slipstream now on this back straight down towards turn 3. Now, turn 3 is quite a tricky corner anyway at the best of times. It's a downhill braking zone. The hill's quite steep, it's difficult to bleed off the speed, and then when you actually turn into the apex, you've got an adverse camber as well, so the corner's actually falling away from you. It makes it very, very difficult for the car to actually get tucked into the apex and actually make the corner. Now, we're just coming into the braking zone now, and as you can see, I'm quite nicely tucked in behind our opponent directly in front of us, and it doesn't really look like that I'm threatening him to make an overtaking maneuver here into this turn. We're just within a car length of the car in front, but he gets on the brakes slightly earlier than the actual braking point. The braking point is roughly round about here, just as I'm getting on the brakes. So I've got on the brakes just that tiny little bit later than he has, sorry. And I've also actually gone and moved to the inside as well. Now, as we continue through the braking zone, you can see that I'm closing up and moving slightly alongside the M6. Now, at this point, he's realised that I'm here coming up on his inside, and he's kind of really got a decision to make. His first option is to either turn in and try and make the apex anyway, with me coming here on the inside. And in this kind of position, if he comes across my nose and there is contact, he's the one who's likely going to end up spinning. His other and second option is to effectively give me the racing room. So I forced him to give up the corner effectively and forced him to give up the inside. He's still going to try and fight it. He's going to give me the racing room, but he's still going to try and hang it around the outside. But he's effectively given me the apex of the corner. So it's obviously gone for option 2. As you can see, he hasn't turned across my nose. We haven't made any contact. We've both kind of run a little bit deep. He's obviously gone deeper than I have, but it's now kind of got me into a position where I'm now alongside him. So that was an example of basically poking your nose in a corner and forcing them to give up the turn. Now, at this point, we're pretty much very much side by side, as you can see. Gone and smashed a brake marker board there as we come into this long left-hander. I'm basically just going to try and continue to see if I can overtake him around the outside. You can see he's had a slight little bit of oversteer there through the mid-corner, and that's allowed me to stay pretty much dead alongside him. And because I'm there on his outside, he's had to accelerate out of the corner a little bit later than he would usually, and that's kind of given me a little bit of an advantage and a little bit of momentum. As you can see, I'm now starting to eke ahead of our opponent. Coming into the next turn, we're still there side by side, so I've had to give him the racing room, but at the same time I've given him a little bit of a squeeze there on the apex and basically forced him to back out of the throttle a little bit. He hasn't been able to pick it up as early as he would usually like to, and that has therefore allowed me to consolidate and take the position away from him. As you can see, he then tucks in behind. So that's a little bit of 2 examples there, kind of in a way, just taking a look at forcing your opponent to give up the apex of the corner to stick your nose in, and then also taking away their acceleration zone in the corner in order to basically help the overtaking maneuver stick. So kind of 2 advanced techniques and maneuvers there in one. Okay, so in this example we're going to be taking a look at a dummy or fake move. Now, we've just come out of turn 1, and as you can see, we've got a relatively decent run here on our opponent. Coming down the straight on the approach to turn 2, picking up a little bit of slipstream, and then our opponent takes the usual racing line, veering slightly over to the left-hand side of the circuit here, whereas I'm sticking over to the right-hand side of the track. Now, what I'm attempting to do is pull my opponent back over to the right-hand side of the circuit in order to try and cover me off a little bit, which he's actually gone and done so. So instead, what I'm going to do is initially move over to the left and make it seem like I'm going to take up the usual racing line, and at this point our opponent has gone so far right as well that he's now right over the very right hand side at the very edge of the track. He's making the corner very, very tight and very, very acute for himself, which is playing very, very nicely into my hands, because what the opponent will need to do in order to get through the corner with any decent amount of speed close to the usual racing speed, he's going to need to bring his car back over to the left of the left-hand side of the track somewhere, but obviously if I'm here on his outside, he needs to give me the racing room as well. So he wants to bring himself back over to the left-hand side of the track as far as he possibly can in order to open up the corner for himself again. So at this point, I know that my opponent is now committed to a line that's going to go from the right-hand side of the track here over towards the left-hand side of the track in order to open up the corner, which means that space is going to open up again on the right-hand side. So you can see that I've gone and thrown, basically I've gone and moved back over to the left-hand side of the track. My opponent recognises that I've gone and moved to the left here, so he's now actually coming onto the brakes, actually really quite early as well. But he's started to move over to the left-hand side of the track as we're coming into the braking zone now. And as you can see, I'm actually setting myself to move back over to the right-hand side of the track so that once that space opens up on the inside, as it very nicely does so here, I have now got the inside of the corner. Now at this point, our opponent probably would have seen us flash in his rear view mirror across the rear of his car and has realised that I'm now on the inside and has therefore got the right to use the full width of the track on the outside. If I was still there on the outside, obviously they need to give me the racing room, but I'm no longer there, so we can use the full width for the track. But and also actually flashing across his mirror, that's probably gone and distracted him a little bit, and therefore helped me in my advance of trying to gain the apex and gain the position by diving down the inside here. Now as you can see, he's run a little bit deep. I've actually gone really quite tight to the inside of the corner and actually caught that curb on the inside there. But as we come out through the exit, he's kind of seen that briefly and has therefore moved slightly further over, and that's essentially allowed me to consolidate my position therefore and pretty much take that place away from him. So that is essentially a dummy maneuver, initially going to one side to make your opponent think that you're going to go in that direction, forcing them to cover and adjust their line, and then you darting back to the other side in the space that is quite nicely opened up. Okay, so in our final overtaking maneuver example, we are going to be taking a look at the classic switchback. Now, as you can see, we are on the run up towards turn 2, once again picking up the slipstream of our opponent directly in front of us. And as we approach the braking zone, our opponent is going to move to the inside line to cover us off and defend any potential chance of me making an overtaking maneuver here coming into this corner. So what I'm going to do is move to his outside, and we're both kind of holding a very central middle line coming down the track. We both could be a bit further over to the left hand side. I certainly could have shifted further over left as well once our opponent had committed to his line defending the inside. Either way, as we're approaching the actual turning point of the corner, as you can see, I've actually been gaining on my opponent here, and our opponent is still coming in relatively hot in towards the apex. He's making the corner very, very tight for himself. He's got to turn a very long corner radius. Now, I'm here on a very nice position on the outside of our opponent, and as our opponent starts to run a little bit deep, what I'm actually going to do is switch back underneath him and focus on getting a good exit. As you can see, our opponent is going to have to wait on the throttle until he's going to have to wait to turn a little bit more before he can get onto the throttle. At this point here, this is where I can start to pick up the throttle and get heavily on the accelerator as I'm straightening the car up much, much earlier than our opponent, who is here on the outside and still turning. So this is going to give us the benefit coming out of the exit here. We're going to be applying the power and getting good traction as we're taking a more straighter direct route coming out through the exit whilst our opponent is still turning, and it's only around about now that he's actually managed to get the car dead straight. So as we continue to advance this on, you can see that I've gone from a couple of car lengths behind to being, well, basically the rear bumper of my car is in line with the front bumper of his car. And it's just essentially a case of defending the inside line coming into here and consolidating the position. So that is essentially the switchback maneuver. If we reverse this back quite nicely, and we'll let it play out in real time as well, we can see it and talk through it once more. So we shall go from here. Just let that play. So we're going to let our opponent defend the inside line. So we're going to take up position on his outside as he runs a little bit deep. Switch back underneath him apply the power heavier and earlier than he can, as he's still turning through the exit, which gives us the run coming off the corner, and this allows us to perform a switchback, and then just defending the inside line coming here into this turn allows us to consolidate and take the position away from our opponents. So that is going to conclude it on this episode of taking a look at advanced overtaking techniques. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try and get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching the episode, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have been enjoying the content, feel free to subscribe to the channel. But otherwise, have a good one, guys. Hopefully I shall catch you in the next one. But until then, have fun and take care.